Okay, this is going to be on plant classification. I'm going to share the screen right now with the PowerPoint. Okay, so we're looking at Kingdom Plantae, and it's in the domain eukaryotes. So remember, we're over here, domain eukaryotes, which evolved from domain archaea. So there's a number of different plants. They're an example of a monophyletic group, which means they have only one ancestor that all land plants came from. So we have the ancestor and we have all its descendants. All right, so single transition from water to land. And our earliest land plant that we're going to look at is actually going to be right here, our bryophytes. Then we're going to look like our seedless vascular plants here, our pterophytes. We're going to look at our gymnosperms, and we're going to look at our angiosperms. There's a few in between, which you'll see if you do your web quest. But all plants have to be multicellular, eukaryotic, they're photoautotrophs, and they have alternation of generations. It's important to note a few plants have lost their ability to be photoautotrophs, like Indian pipe. If you go hiking, you see that. It kind of looks like a fern fiddlehead, but it's all white and it's become parasitic. So our first plants are more than 3 billion years ago. And life we know evolved in the sea. So our first photosynthetic organisms are aquatic green algae, or we can also go as far back as cyanobacteria. Okay. So our present day relatives, ancient plants, you have the Spirogyra here. Okay. We have a couple of other examples of different algae, and some bacteria are like cyanobacteria. So 500 million years ago, land plants start to evolve. And to live on land, you have a whole new environment, which means you have a whole new set of problems that you have to adapt to, or you will not survive. So one is the cuticle. The cuticle is above the epidermis on the leaf. You see it here. And that's the waxy coating. And if you get a pine needle and you rub your nail across to get that white stuff up, that's the cuticle. At the bottom, in most plants, water lilies, it'd be at the top, you have the stomate, or sometimes stomas, whether it's single or plural. That's where the gas exchange occurs. And then we have here our xylem and phloem. We're not going to see that in all land plants. We're going to actually not start to see that until ferns develop. And then after ferns, we get protection for the embryo, the seeds forming. So they don't depend on the parent plant anymore. Right? So this is our cladogram, or our phylogenetic tree. So we have our ancestral protist down here, similar to a green algae. Right? And then colonization to land, bryophytes, which are a non-vascular plant. This is your moss. So this part of the moss, the green part that you think of, that's going to be haploid. And the part that occasionally comes up like this, that is diploid. So they do not have vascular tissue. Then we get vascular tissue. This is going to really allow plants to grow a lot taller because they're not dependent on just root pressure, that positive pressure. They can now have negative pressure to get water up. And our first ones are going to be, here's our tracheophytes. So the xylem, remember, is made of tracheids. And there's our pterophyta. So this means wing, and you can kind of see the fern here looks like a wing. It's seedless, so it doesn't have a seed to help disperse its embryo. Right? The other thing that's true about both bryophytes and pterophytes is they have sperm that actually has to swim in water to get to the egg of the plant. So that's why you're going to find these always in areas where there's a lot of water available for that, so moist areas. After that, you get pollen. You're no longer depending on water for your sperm to get to the egg, and that means you can live in many more environments, and you have a seed to help disperse your young. So that's what we're going to see in our next two groups. The first is the gymnosperm. It's pollen. It has a naked seed. So the pollen cone that you think of, the end of each of those scales is an embryo, is a seed, but it's not as protected as what we're going to find with our angiosperms, our flowering plants. They have flowers to attract pollinators. So here with the gymnosperms, they're just depending on wind. You have to make a lot of pollen in the hope that some of it will get to another conifer. And here in the angiosperms, because you have flowers that attract specific insects or bats or bees, birds, whatever, they are going to only go to a specific type of plant or only a few types of plants, and that increases your chance of pollination. And then fruit is really going to be important for dispersal of the seeds. So animals, we spend most of our lives diploid, right? And you undergo meiosis to make your gametes, egg or sperm. That's haploid, and we do fertilization to reform a zygote and your new diploid generation that will go by mitosis. Plants, on the other hand, okay, they have a generation that's called diploid also, but we refer to it as the sporophyte generation. It undergoes meiosis and it creates spores. So that's where its name comes from, what it creates. Right? So here we're not creating gametes, we're creating spores. And you can see these on the back of a fern. These are called the sorus, and that's where the spores are. Okay. And then there's a haploid gametophyte generation that forms from that. That undergoes mitosis to form gametes because it's already been made haploid. It's not going to need to go meiosis to form gametes. That fertilizes and forms a new sporophyte. And that will grow. So sporophyte is diploid, and then gametophyte is haploid. And that's what we're talking about when we refer to alternation of generations, the sporophyte and the gametophyte generations. Okay, so sporophyte, always diploid, is producing haploid spores by meiosis. Gametophyte is haploid, and it produces haploid gametes via mitosis because it's already haploid. And fertilization will form the diploid zygote. Now, firstly, in plants, these are the mosses. So if you're able to go outside, you'll find a number of moss beds, probably around your backyard or wherever you live. And at this point, most of them are just this green gametophyte, and that is going to be haploid, but a few might have this sporophyte, the diploid generation coming out of it. Okay, they're non-vascular. They have no true, no water transport system, no true roots. Again, if you talk to a bryophologist, they will get into more specifics and they will point out exceptions to this. There's swimming sperm that helps limit their size because they have to be close to the water so the sperm can swim from the male plant to the female plant. The male plant is called the antheridium, is where the sperm is made, and the archegonium is where the egg is. And its dominant phase, where it spends most of its time, does its photosynthesis, is going to be the gametophyte stage. And the spores for reproduction, those are coming from the sporophyte that's up here. So that's going to help disperse those pretty far. Okay, and here's some different examples. Peat moss is an example as well, the peat bogs. And the next evolutionary adaptation that we end up seeing, or shared-derived characteristic, that's going to separate our tracheophytes from our bryophytes, is vascular tissue. So we've talked about this before. You have your xylem, which is transporting water, and your phloem, which is transporting sugar. The xylem transporting water means you're not just depending on the positive pressure at the roots, but now you can also have that negative pressure and transpirational pull. So our first ones, we're going to focus on the ferns, and that's your pterophytes. So you have water transport system. It's always going roots to shoots. It's going to use the xylem. We're also going to have phloem for sugar. We're going to have some roots here. We have our leaves. Still swimming sperm, flagellated sperm. So you still have to, the ferns still have to live where it's relatively moist. And then the life cycle here, the fern that you think of, that's sporophyte. Okay, it is diploid, it's doing the photosynthesis. Over here, this little heart-shaped leaf, that's called the prothallus. And it has a section on it that is the female archegonium and a section on it that's the male antheridium. Right? And then the spores, those are made here on the back of your fern at the sorus. And that will form your new gamete. No spores, I'm sorry, your new spores. All right, so these you've probably seen, these grow in our area, and then the typical fern that grows in our area, and I've even seen some that look like this. Right, so there's a number of different types of ferns. Right, and here's the prothallus, the gametophyte generation, and it's a small haploid plant. It's producing the gametes. Okay, so the male and the female are in the same part of the plant, and that's why it's called homospory. If they were in different plants, like it would be called heterospory. Right, so here's your archegonium, that's where the egg is. There's your antheridium, that's where the sperm is made. Okay, so we're going to see that alternation generations. We started with our bryophytes with the dominant gametophyte, and now in our sporophyte, in our ferns, we have a dominant sporophyte, and we do have an independent gametophyte. So here we see what it looks like for our ferns. Archegonium, again, female egg. Antheridium, the sperm swims to the egg, fertilizes it, you get your sporophyte, and then on the back, you have the sorus making the spores to form the new gametophyte, okay? So these are your early trees, and they decayed, and these plants became our coal and our oil. And there's some early fern trees we still have. These are your fronds. There are fiddleheads. Some people do eat fiddleheads. Pickled. Our next big evolution are two things. First thing is we get a seed. So that's going to help with the dispersion of the offspring. We, of course, still have vascular tissue. We're going to see heterospory. So we're going to have male and female gametophytes. The picture here is of a female gametophyte, the ovulate cone. And then if you look, you'll see little cones sometimes coming out. They're not even quite looking like cones. They're kind of yellow in color on some pine trees. Those are the males. The seed is a naked one. So you have, this is a scale taken off the pine cone. The seed is down here. So it's not going to have a fruit. It doesn't have food like an endosperm. But now we have pollen, and that's going to allow these to grow where it's colder and where there's more wind, and you're not depending on water anymore to transport the sperm, right? So our dominant life cycle here is a sporophyte, and we're going to have a reduced microscopic gametophyte that is going to be dependent upon that sporophyte. But that helps protect the egg and the embryo from drought and also UV radiation. So it serves as an adaptation. Okay, this is ginkgo. And this is another one that we don't see much of in our area. And here's a number of different conifers. So again, there's a number of different types. So this is your cone, and the scales at the end of each is the seed. So that's why it's called a naked seed, right? And you have, these are, oops, I have to go back there, I'm gonna look too fast. This is the male ones that you'll see. You can see all the pollen coming off of it, and this is the female, okay? So the pollen, again, eliminating the requirement of water for fertilization. And then our first flowering plants, those are angiosperms. So again, we're seeing the same vascular tissue that started out with the tracheophytes. We have heterosporia, male and female gametophyte. But now we're getting a flower. That's going to be allowing for coevolution with pollinators. And we have seeds with fruit that help with the dispersal because animals like the orangutan over there will eat the fruit, travel the seeds because they are protected, will go through their digestive tract, and it will disperse them. And then we have pollen still. So that's, again, going to help stop limiting where these flowering plants can live. So trees and bushes, you're familiar with, those are diploid. And again, we have that reduced gametophyte generation. So your oak tree, your oak tree, your maple tree, those are flowering plants. It's just they have a microscopic flower. And then the flowers that you think of, but even grass is a flowering plant. Okay, so angiosperm life cycle, we have the most of it being sporophyte. The petals here, the leaves, the stems, the root, that's all sporophyte. The gametophyte generation is going to be for a female, it's this embryo sac here, and the male is going to be the pollen. So the pollen is going to be made in the male part here, which is the filament, and then the anther that forms a stamen, and in the anther that pollen is produced. And then the female embryo sac is down here in the ovary. Okay, so this goes stigma, style, ovary. The whole thing is called either the pistil or the carpel. Okay, so the male gametophyte is your pollen grain. Female gametophyte is your ovary sac, or sometimes called embryo sac. So you can see the pollen grain lands on top of the stigma, and then it has to grow a pollen tube that goes all the way down the style. Okay, and in there we have two polar nuclei in the egg cell. These two polar nuclei are going to be fertilized to form the endosperm. The egg cell gets fertilized to form the embryo. So two sperm are necessary to go down that pollen tube. And where they go in, as you see here, that is called the micropyle. And it's a double fertilization event. You get the zygote and you get the endosperm. The zygote, the diploid zygote, that's your embryo. The endosperm is triploid. That's the food for the seed. If you only had one sperm, then you'd only get the zygote and you wouldn't get the endosperm, and that seed wouldn't survive and wouldn't become a new plant. Right? The surrounding tissue, the ovary, ripens and that becomes the fruit to help with dispersal. So flowers, these are modified shoots with 4 rings. Okay, you have your sepals, those are protecting your flower buds. Those are down here. In this picture, they're green. Sometimes they look like petals. The petals are a modified leaf. They're colored for the pollinators to attract them. The stamen, that's the male part, anther and filament. The anther makes the pollen. The filament holds it up for the pollinators. The carpel, or sometimes it's called the pistil, if you see that. That's the stigma, style, and the ovary. And inside the ovary is the seed. When the ovary ripens, that becomes the fruit. Okay, and these were all adaptations through mutations. Okay, so here are some examples. And you might want to go outside if you can and see some flowering plants and see if you can recognize them in actual flowering plants. And we have a lot of variations based on both the pollinators. And here you see the red that attracts this hummingbird. The white attracts the bat. This yellow attracts the bumblebee. Okay, and this bumblebee is seeing it because you've probably seen this before. They see UV light. So really it's kind of bullseyeing right where that nectar is. So this can get completely dusted in the pollen. Okay, and then we have 2 types of fruit. You have your dry versus fleshy fruit. So we typically think of fruits as the fleshy ones. And anything that contains a seed for a botanist is a fruit. So peppers, even hot ones, are fruits. Eggplants are fruits. Tomatoes are fruits, right? All of these are considered to be fruits. Your coconut is a fruit. Even this little maple is a fruit, even though we don't eat it. So ripened over, that helps with dispersal. So here we have our dry fruits. Those will cling, for instance, on your dog, a burr, and it disperses it, even though it doesn't eat it. A fleshy fruit, it's going to have this ripened parenchyma cells, and those are going to be edible. And most animals are not spitting out the seeds, so they're going to disperse them. Here is our seed. This is acting as protection for the embryo. It stores the nutrients. So the seed coat is that outer coat. If you've ever opened up like a pistachio or a peanut, and that it has that coating around it. That's your endosperm. That's going to form the food source. Here's our embryo. And here's your two cotyledons, your seed leaves. And oops, I forgot to mention something. You can see where the micropyle was. So if an angiosperm, two sperms are needed, one for the embryo, one for the food, the endosperm. Otherwise, if you don't have to, this endosperm won't form, that seed will not survive. So here we have our seed structure. And you've probably, if you've opened up a peanut, you've seen this here. As a kid, we used to call it the little guy in the peanut. I don't know why, but we did. Here is the epicotyl. That's going to become the leaves. Hypocotyl, right? What's right under the leaves? That's the stem. And then the radicle, that's the root. Okay, so the first thing to always come out will be the root. And then we have the same thing in the corn. It's a little harder to see. I would focus more on the dicot here. And the difference, the monocot has only one cotyledon, the dicot has two. All of this here in the kind of the beige, that's the endosperm too. That's where it's being stored in those cotyledons. So our seed coat, that's going to protect the embryo from drying out. The endosperm, that's the food source. Cotyledons, those first leaves of a lot of plants, they absorb the food. In fact, when you first see a plant come out, you'll see that there'll be the leaves, and then you'll see these little droopy things right underneath. Those were the cotyledons. That's in a dicot. Epicotyls, those develop into your leaves. Hypocotyl shoot, radical root. Right? And this is in gibberellins, that hormone, that's important for germination. So remember, water washes away the abscisic acid hormone, which inhibits germination. Then gibberellin is released, and that's going to act on this outer layer, and that is going to actually cause a release of an amylase. That's an enzyme that will break down the endosperm, and that will provide the food for the embryo to start to germinate. That's why you water your seeds after you plant them. After we get to the division of angiosperms, we divide them further into two other groups, the dicots and the monocots. So dicots have two seed leaves or cotyledons. The leaves are in a network of veins, like you see here. They kind of branch out. Flower parts are always in multiples of 4 or 5. They tend to be your woody plants, your trees, your shrubs, your beans. Monocots have one cotyledon. Their flower parts are multiples of 3, and they have those parallel veins. So grasses, palms, lily, corns, those are all monocots. Okay, so you can see your monocot. Here's your dicot over here. You also would see that the arrangement of the vascular tissue is different. In a dicot in the stem, it's in a circle. In the monocot, it's going to be scattered. But in the root and the dicot, here is the xylem. It's like this X in the root. But the monocot root, it's in a circle. So you have to be very careful. Are they talking about the root, or are they talking about the stem? Because in the stem, the dicot is in a circle and the monocot is scattered. All right. That's all for this lecture. If you have any questions, feel free to email them to me and I will get back to them.